This is Captain Lee Noga from Central Florida bringing you one of the more popular seminars in Central Florida because we keep it real. I'm not an expert by my definition. I've grown up the hard way on the river through the school of hard knocks, and I have made a lifetime commitment, at least in my later years, to try to figure out how this sport works. So many people have not been able to attend my seminar, and I decided to give it a go and put it in various segments using YouTube. You can find me on the river by looking at my boat on the screen. If you find me out there, give me some space. We can all get along, and climbing onto my bow doesn't make either one of us do real well. If you're wondering what shrimping is like, this is a night of shrimping with me. Notice it's not pretty. We dump our nets, we drop things, we spill things, we have jellyfish slime. It's a mess. If you are one of those kind of people that can't handle a mess or get upset when their boat is dirty, this sport may not be for you. Let's talk about anchoring. Matter of fact, let's take you with me on a make-believe night of shrimping. Let's say we're at the ramp. When you are about to set out to go shrimping, just take your ears on your engine and start your boat in your driveway. I used to buy an old water bin used for cows and cattle. I think it was 70 gallons. And I would drop my 40 horse into this basin of water and make sure my engine was running. Always put some gear on, because even though a boat runs in neutral, it doesn't mean it will run when it's in gear. The first thing you should do is make sure your boat is ready to go. Check your navigation lights. Check your tires. Grease your bearings. This is all good karma. You don't want to be broken down on the side of the road, especially when we're dipping in some of the most horrible hours. And it's not always great to have strangers help you. You don't know what you could be getting into. So let's pretend we're going out shrimping tonight, and we've went ahead and started our engine. We've checked our nav lights. We've done our countdown list. We've packed our boat out. Let's get into what it's like at the ramp. One of the more popular ramps is the Oak Hill River Breeze ramp. And when you drop your boat down there, please remember to turn your headlights off. I think this is the number one grievance we all have, especially when we're topside and we're looking forward to dropping our boat, but we are seeing spots when it's our turn because in the process of your 5 or 6 minute launch, you have blinded us for quite a while with your headlights. So always turn your headlights off. Oak Hill is a 2-boat ramp, but most of us are just happy that we can back it down, and we tend to take up the whole space. Well, let me tell you how I feel about that. I'm one of those. I'm going to take up the whole ramp. I'm not the best at backing up my boat, but that's the way it's going to go. But I'm pretty fast. Some people will squeeze in with you even though you're certain there's not enough room. That's just life. If you don't like this pressure, or you're nervous, or it's chaotic, and you just feel you have a million eyes watching you, go ahead of time. Go before the crowds. That's actually a very good idea because you get first choice of locations. You don't have the pressure of trying to get things set up, because when we have that pressure, accidents happen. So let's say we've successfully launched our boat down the ramp and we're in Oak Hill. I always go left. Now you're going to see a house on the seawall, which they call the White House. Every couple years, that house gets painted. It's been blue, it's been orange, it's been mint green, it's been gray, but we call it the White House. It's probably 500 yards south of the ramp. That's a good little area if you're afraid to go that far. So many people are afraid to drive at night, and so oftentimes I'm scared to be around people that are driving at night. We have these things called channel markers. I always drive with a torchlight in my hand. I always go really slow. If you didn't know, it's a no-wake zone from marker 65, which is 4 miles north of the Oak Hill ramp, down to 9A, which is about 3.5 miles south. It's a no-wake zone. But people tend to fly by, the guilty being the commercial. On the screen you're looking at a Danforth anchor. Pretending now you're on my boat, this is not my anchor of choice. It might be the best anchor in the world for snorkeling, lobster diving, and fishing, but it doesn't necessarily translate to the best anchor for shrimping. For example, the bottom sediment is a lot more squishy and mushy in Oak Hill. When you go further north a few miles, you're in Edgewater, and the river bottom is a lot more hard-panned and sand-based. And these anchors don't always set, and you can find yourself sliding. Sliding is very, very dangerous. Me, because we're on our shrimping adventure tonight, we're going to set our boat up horizontal. Horizontal means that my bow is facing the houses and my engine is facing the clinkers, where on the other side is the ocean. So if you're one of those north, south, east, and west people, then let me put it to you this way. My bow is facing west and my engine is facing east. I will never use a Danforth anchor, and you're going to hear why. But this is what I will use. This is what I recommend. I don't know how many of you believe in insurance, but I can tell you for a lot of my boating years, I never had insurance. To be quite honest with you, I can't afford $350 a year to pay for boat insurance. I'm just grateful I can keep the bearings on my wheels. So until I got my captain's license back in '07, I never had insurance. I never thought about it, because to me, I wasn't going to have an accident. How often do you get that close to another boat? It was a ridiculous expense in my mind, until I started shrimping. And in the frenzy, in tidal waters, around March, there could be 200 boats. There's a boat every 30 yards, and this can become a problem. I like to anchor perpendicular in the river, meaning my bow is facing the houses. I turn my boat around using a trolling motor. Otherwise, I'm pretty comical to watch, trying to set both anchors. When I set my back anchor, I set it with my delta. That is a spade anchor. That's my back anchor. When I know it's set and the boat is spinning around, I will proceed with my trolling motor and set that 3-paddle anchor called a claw. That anchor in that photo is probably 16 pounds, but I also have an 11-pounder, which I use for snorkeling and fishing. Why do I have 28-foot sailboat anchors? Do I own a sailboat? Absolutely not. Do I have a huge offshore boat? Absolutely not. I have a 17-foot skiff. It's a Polar. Closest relative? A Caroline skiff, center console. Why would I go down with 2 powerhouse anchors? Well, I'll tell you why. We're set out in the river tonight on our make-believe trip, and I've got my anchor set. The tide is slack, meaning the incoming is just about finished. I've deployed my anchors, and I know when the current does start to go out, my boat's going to shift about 5 foot east. It always does. So when you set your boat during slack tide, things are going to change a little bit from how you see them at slack once the tide goes out. So don't be so quick to set your light field, or you'll be resetting it again. I deploy a box net, a back net, frame net. It has all kinds of device names. A collection net, a bag. It has all kinds of nicknames. If you do deploy a frame net, is what I commonly call them, that's going to create a lot of hydrodynamic drag. And this drag is going to put a lot of stress on your anchors. So I want to make sure that my anchors have me down. There's no sick feeling like when your boat starts to slide. And typically, the person that puts that ball in motion is a very rude boater, and mostly the commercial guys that come barreling through and sending me a wall of water. That wall of water is strong enough where it raises my boat 2 to 3 foot sometimes up into the air, and that breaks the suction of my anchors, and I start sliding. Imagine myself having 3 lights deployed, 2 anchors out, and a frame net with a 20-foot bag attached to a 10-foot pipe, and I'm now sliding backwards. I have become a missile that can strike anybody behind me. What do you do? I have had passengers panic and turn my engine on, and all it did was prop valve me. Now I was unable to become underway, and in my personal experience, I was facing a tug, and I was unable to get out of harm's way. The last thing you want to do is become a missile. Do you and can you afford the accident? Are you ready to lose your house to lawsuits? Are you ready to endanger the passengers on your boat? Are you ready to strike and hurt some other passengers behind you? If your anchor's let loose, you are a floating missile, and it's happened to me many, many times. The Danforth anchors are not always the most reliable anchors, and they're one of the hardest anchors to set, especially when you're trying to turn your boat around so that your bow is west and your engine is east. To me, using a spade anchor, which is the picture says Delta on it, or the claw anchor made by Lewmar, Lewmar, I know that I'm down, and these anchors are designed to dig, almost too good that it can be a real pain at the end of the night to get them back in. But I know I can give my passengers safeties and those around behind me greater safety, because the last thing you want to do is be the person that strikes another boat and have no insurance. One of the most common things we're going to talk about, since you're riding on my boat tonight, is about the moon. So many things are talked about locally about the moon, and it's interesting how many people, if they know nothing about shrimping, do understand there's a moon influence. Well, there is, and we're going to talk about it. At the top of the chart, let's just start there. A cycle is a cycle, and the moon is always changing. It's ever changing, actually. So let's start at a half moon. The diagram is a little misleading because the half moon is diagrammed correctly, but the new moon isn't. So follow my lead. Can we talk? This is what I think about the moon. The half moon at the top of this diagram is half white and half black. That means the tide is at its weakest. Shrimp like to be locomoted. They can swim 3 to 5 miles a day. And by the way, when you catch shrimp with red legs, that is not a species. So many people believe those are Oak Hill Reds. Well, then how come there are red-legged shrimp in the Keys and in Miami? Are those Oak Hill Reds too? Absolutely not. You can catch summer shrimp, the white shrimp, also known as the gray shrimp, the brown shrimp, the pink shrimp. These are all the 3 common species. They all get red legs, and all that means is they were migrating. Actually, they were swimming, and that's why their legs are red. So on a half moon, they're going to have to swim, and they can't ride the current. Sometimes shrimp hitchhike in grass and debris. That's not my favorite time to go, because it may be difficult for a slow, lazy current to open a frame net. It doesn't mean not to go. It just means it might not be the best night, and it might not be a good night at all to deploy a frame net. But after that half moon passes, for the next week, the next 7 days, the tide builds. And every day in that 7-day building cycle, the tide gets stronger. So after a half moon, we have 1 week of a building moon. You can see it in the diagram. At the end of the 7 days, we are at a new moon, which means the moon is totally black. That's my favorite moon. The reason is the Earth tilts 3 degrees, and we get a lot of water that gets deep into the Mosquito Lagoon Islands and gets deep back into the estuaries. And when that tide changes, the water comes out with a vengeance, and it rips out grass and it rips the shrimp out. The shrimp don't live in the intercoastal. They simply travel there. So we are guaranteed strong currents, and shrimp love strong currents when you're in tidal waters. But after that delicious new moon comes and goes, the next 7 days, the currents get weaker. And at the end of 7 days, we hit a half moon again. And once again, like we were 2 weeks ago, we are in the laziest of currents, the slowest, slow, lazy, putsy. It may never show strength during the 6 hours. It's just a lazy current. But that doesn't need not to go. Sometimes when we have a good wind from the south, southeast, southwest, east, west, as long as it's not dead north, it can compensate sometimes for that lazy current. So after a half moon, the next 7 days, every day that current gets stronger. And then at the end of 7 days, we have a full moon, meaning the moon is totally bright. You can see it. That's not my favorite day. The actual full moon in tidal water has always been a disaster for me. For some reason, I could never understand why, and it wasn't until I evolved in my research that I put 2 and 2 together. Well, no wonder they don't like the full moon. It's too bright for them. They have amplified lenses, and they can process natural light, and it drives them deeper. But the good news is you have strong current, but those little crickets are going to be deep, and the smaller ones tend to be on the top surface. For 1 day a month, that's just my preference. That's the day I stay home, in tidal waters. This is the lights that we use. There are so many clones now that follow the Mac Daddy light. The Mac Daddy light came out in 2012, and what it made it revolutionary was it came with both a green and a white strip. When I got it in my hands, I realized the value of this. And not only that, we could quantitatively take the physics from this light and set it into motion in a way that you can use a simple formula to set it in the water column. The green light is simply for you can see. Shrimp don't like any light. They don't even like the natural moon. That green light is for your eyes, so that they don't fatigue as quickly as they will with the white light. If I put you on my sofa and I took the lampshade off and had you stare at my light on the end table, you would be pretty cranky within 15 minutes. Imagine staring at a white light for 6 hours in tidal waters. It's a no bueno. It's painful. It's not pleasant. The green light is very soothing. It lessens the fatigue. But there is still great value with white light, and there are people that prefer a white light. Matter of fact, in Brevard, a white light is preferred in Haulover Canal. The white light in a hybrid light, which contains 2 colors, in my opinion, gives us some vertical depth. And for that reason, when I deploy a shrimp light, I deploy this model that has both the green and white that gives me a cone of light with a 120-degree directional cone, roughly 5 foot thick, that I can create black water above it, and shrimp need black water to come into my view. You want to see my light? Here it is. Nothing special. I have 17 foot of rope, 3/8 thick, which is roughly the diameter of probably my pinky. I pour 7-pound sinkers. I figured if they were good enough for the beach, then they ought to be good enough to hold my light. There's nothing worse when you deploy a light and it blows back to your boat. Using mushroom anchors, using anything that's going to roll is going to be a problem. You got to be creative and come up with a way so that when you throw your light, and I go into the whole theory of setting a light, that light has to stay where you throw it. You have to have that kind of control. I pour these sinkers, and Marker69.com sells these sinkers. The clip you see is a long line clip. I use that to clamp my rope. That decides where my light floats in the water column. This is now the universal look of a light. Everybody has copied this light, and it is the industry standard. Here is the lead, nothing special, and this is how I attach it to the rope, a simple shackle. A long line clip, about 5.5 inches long. The bull nose is what clamps onto the rope. You can use a 3/8 or 5/16 bull nose. This has a 120-pound hand strength. Never buy the 140-pound. It's way too hard to squeeze, at least for my little hand. This is the last photo in this segment. This is what it looks like. It's roughly positioned 6 inches below my light. That's the way I like it, and there's reasons why the light has evolved the way it has, and I'll be getting into that deeper into my ongoing seminars. Thank you for watching this, and this is Captain Lee Noga from the Academy of Shrimping. Join us on our Facebook page, Florida Shrimping Academy Tips and Tricks, where we have the intel.